All right. Well, good morning, everybody. First, I want to thank you all for participating in our first of 3 virtual sessions. To give you an idea, we are overwhelmed with how popular this has turned out to be. We had over 500 people registered for today's event, and we hope that all of you and all of your loved ones are staying healthy during this very difficult time. As I said, today's the first of our 3-part series. We're going to be going over the importance of ongoing treatments, risks associated with virtual assessments, and how insurers are responding. We've also had a number of you provide questions that Stacey or Len will try to get to today, or they'll be answered in sessions that are the upcoming ones. We are going to try to limit this to the 30 minutes. So around 10:30, we will be closing off the session. We are recording the session today. And depending on how the quality turns out, we will be sharing that with everybody once we're done. You are going to be muted as this is a webinar, so only Stacey and Len will be speaking during the session. If you do have any questions, feel free to chat them to us. And Stacey and Len will try to answer them at the time, or if they're ones that I can deal with, I'll be responding on their behalf. You will be muted during the session, so as I mentioned, that'll be why we'll be using the chat function. And with that, I just want to pass this along to Len and Stacey to get started, and I hope everybody really enjoys our session today.
So, thanks very much, Mark, and thank you all for joining us this morning. We hope you're all keeping well during this crisis. We wanted to touch on 3 items this morning in the webinar that I think will be important to all of you. Since we only have about a half an hour, we're going to go through this fairly quickly, but we're happy to stay on afterward if people have some questions and deal with those questions. So the first issue that we were going to talk about is the importance of ongoing treatment during the COVID-19 crisis. And Stacey, you want to start us off?
Yeah, we've had this talk and these questions come up with a lot of healthcare people that we work with, and it's definitely necessary to continue with some form of treatment during all of this for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's to make sure that all of our clients, your clients, are being able to adapt to this new normal world that they've now found themselves in, right? Their routines are disrupted. They're not getting the in-person treatment. They may have kids who are at home now, spouses who are at home with them. So it's a whole new world that they're trying to adapt to, that they're likely having significant challenges. So very important from that point of view. Also, we want to make sure that treatment is ongoing, because we don't want to have a response down the road from adjusters saying, well, your client has gone without treatment for X number of weeks or X number of months. So why do we need to keep going? They've done well without it.
And I think on that point, Stacey, it's important that as treatment providers that you document this very carefully with the insurer, both in your treatment plans and then in your reports, your ongoing reports. I think it's important to indicate to insurers that treatment, whether it's by Zoom or on the telephone, telehealth, whatever system you're using to continue providing treatment to your clients, that this is not necessarily the optimal form of treatment. And the insurer should know that, and know that you're doing the best you can in these circumstances, and that you hope to return to in-person treatment when this crisis is over.
When it comes to documenting the assessments that you're doing by Zoom, or like Len said, by telehealth or some other way, keep in mind a couple of things. One is that the level of treatment that they're getting may not be ideal. So for a variety of different reasons, such as, like I said, overwhelm, other people being in the house, you're only getting this one view, right, of the person. You're seeing me sitting here in my I've got my shirt, I've got my hair brushed, but if I was your client, you're not really going to have that full understanding of what my day has been like. If this is the first time I've gotten out of bed in a month, or have I not showered in, an X period of days. So as important as it is to document the progress that you're making, document any signs of regression, any signs of difficulties that the client is having in dealing with virtual or remote treatment. And as well, if you have clients who aren't participating at all for whatever reason it is, when you do get back into seeing them, hopefully, you know, with all of our fingers crossed, maybe May, June at the latest, make sure to really take a good look at any traction that they may have lost in their progress. Are they still at the same level the last time you saw them? Because we have this opportunity to mine some really helpful information, because we all know there's going to come a time when the adjusters are going to say your treatment plans are no longer reasonable and necessary. From the tort side, we hear from defendants all the time, you know, they're not going to really need that treatment. They're not going to use that treatment. And part of our standard response is, well, yes, they do. And without this treatment, they're going to regress. They're going to get worse. So now is the perfect opportunity to document examples of how your clients are regressing or how their situation is changing without treatment being in place. And that's information that then we can get later if we have to, and to actually be able to document what we're putting forward.
It's important, in addition to what Stacey has said about documenting regression or how people are coping with reduced treatment or this alternate form of treatment, you should also, in your reports, prepare the insurer for the fact that a lot of people who are suffering now during this crisis with reduced treatment or a different form of treatment that they're not familiar with or they're having difficulty coping with, that may result in the need for increased treatment once we're back to some semblance of normalcy. So I think, again, it's important to prepare the insurer for the fact that some people are going to need increased levels of treatment when we get back to some semblance of normalcy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely, Leland. I agree. And the other thing is, just one more point on the documentation, right, is to make sure that you should probably be including some sort of a disclaimer, right? It's an imperfect solution in an imperfect world that we're living in right now. We don't want insurers to come back after this is over and turn it around and say, well, you know, you've been able to provide this remote or virtual treatment for X number of weeks. So why do we now need to start funding in-person treatment? Why do we now have to start consider funding your travel time? So always make sure that, you know, imperfect solution, imperfect world, we're doing this in order to reduce the risks that the client may regress, that the client may not continue to achieve their goals, or we're doing it to maintain the goals that our clients have already achieved.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the participants today raised the question of whether we should even be calling this virtual treatment, because virtual suggests that the treatment provider is not there. And they took exception to that suggestion, because if the treatment is being provided by telehealth or by Zoom or some other platform, it's not that you're not there. Insurers seem to be using this terminology, virtual treatment. I don't know that it matters whether we call it that or whether we try to change the terminology and call it something else, emergency treatment or alternate treatment. As long as the insurer understands that this is not the optimal form of treatment that you're recommending, I don't know whether the wording that we use is going to be critical. And I don't think the insurers, hopefully the insurers are not going to try to take advantage of the situation where you're calling it virtual treatment. There was somebody who also reached out yesterday and asked us the question that an insurer was specifically requesting them to code their treatment as virtual treatment or alternative treatment, as opposed to what the college for that particular professional was saying, which is this is not virtual treatment if you're doing it by Zoom or by telehealth. And it was a speech language pathologist, I believe, wasn't it, Stacey?
Yeah.
And you know, this is an alternative form of treatment that the college permits and considers it the same as in-person treatment. So, you know, I think you have to consult your college on that. If the college considers the treatment that you're providing the equivalent of in-person treatment, I don't know that you even have to call it virtual treatment. But I do think that it's important in the treatment plan to indicate that it's not a complete substitute for in-person treatment.
Yes, and I think just to be clear, what the IBC's position was that SLPs, instead of providing the way they wanted them to code it, was that it was being coded as indirect treatment. So I'm waiting to get a little bit more information on that and sort of understand what the IBC's reasoning behind that was, so we can give a more fulsome answer a little bit down the road, perhaps through an email blast that we'll send out to everybody who's participating today.
All right, so the second topic that we wanted to quickly cover was the risks of using these alternative forms of treatment, be it Zoom or telehealth or any other of these platforms that are available out there. And the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about virtual assessments is that obviously there are going to be some types of things that you can't do in a virtual assessment that you would do in an in-person assessment. And I'm thinking particularly of physical injuries where the treatment provider or the assessor has to actually physically measure certain things, muscle wasting, reactions to a particular type of testing or treatment. These things are very hard to measure when you're doing the assessment or the treatment remotely. This is a big challenge, I think, with having to provide these services in an alternate form.
Similarly, if you're doing any type of psychological assessment, right, where you may often be relying on body language that may not be fully captured in the assessment, whether it's being done via computer, whether it's being done by the phone. There are privacy concerns. Is your client that you're assessing, are they the only person in the room? Are there distractions going on? Are there kids there, spouse there? Are there people there that your client may not want to be as open and honest with you as they would be in person? Or worst case scenarios, if your client is someone who may be in more of an abusive or having domestic crisis at home, is there someone else standing on the other side of that computer, prompting them, cueing them, giving them direction on what to say? So there are a lot of risks and frailties with doing assessments virtually.
One of our participants posed a question today that we hope to deal with in one of our upcoming seminars on catastrophic assessments, but it touches a little bit on what Stacey is talking about here. And it was the whole issue of how do you do validity testing when you're doing a virtual assessment? And that's definitely a challenging question. We're going to be speaking to some of the CAT assessors in the city, trying to get their take on how they're coping with that, because it's certainly one of the things that from a psychological point of view and from an assessment point of view, we thought about is, how do you accurately measure validity testing in a remote situation? So we hope to have a little more information for our next presentation on how assessment centers are dealing with the whole validity testing issue.
Actually, I just saw something pop up in the chat, and I think it was, I think the lady's name was Nancy, and she's right. There are certain patients, especially clients with brain injury, right, who just don't have the ability to cope with the use of technology, right? Whether they're so severely brain injured that they can't even cope with the basic function of getting it to work properly, or they don't have the ability to sit in front of a screen for an hour. And we hear that from our clients about the sensitivity issues from being on a computer, as well as, yes, Christine, as well as the elderly. So it does cause some concern for us when we're talking about doing assessments. And then I think, Glenn, the other thing that we had chatted about as well in preparing for this is the role of the IE assessments at this time.
Right. And so it's interesting. We're finding that a lot of insurers are not doing their IE assessments right now because they don't want to do them virtually. It's actually provided an opportunity for counsel like us to try to work things out with insurers. In some cases, what we've done is we've got the insurer to agree to pay for a benefit until they can actually do their assessments in person again. and most insurers have been fairly cooperative that way. They understand that this is a problem, that we're in a difficult time right now. So I found at least that most insurers right now are quite willing to work with us and and not use this as an obstacle. Now that doesn't mean that all insurers are going to do that. There are some insurers that are going to try to take advantage of this situation. We've already heard and seen some insurers, for instance, have already sent out a letter to all of their insureds that if an insured is receiving the Canada Emergency Response Benefit for loss of income, that they're treating that as if it excludes the person from getting their income replacement benefit. I would challenge that. I wouldn't say that that is necessarily accurate, but there's an example of insurers trying to take advantage of the current situation. So I don't think that we can presume that insurers are just going to play nicely during this time and not try to take advantage of the situation.
Yeah, I had an experience with one of my clients, and the insurer, I think it was RSW services that were being provided, and the insurer took the position that it was not an essential service under the list that was put out. And this may have been, I think this is when it first came out, the original list. And they said, I'm sorry, but you know what? You're not an essential worker under the list that's been put up by the Ontario government. So you can provide all the services you want, but we're not going to pay you because you're not supposed to be working. And we were able to get that resolved after having a discussion with the adjuster. But Len's right. It's going to definitely depend on an insurer by insurer basis.
And some of the chats that we are receiving make some good points that, there's always the opportunity for a paper review that insurers can do. They can always ask for an assessment be done on an urgent basis if you believe there's going to be a decline in a person's condition. So these are all options that are available to help get treatment or assessments done during this difficult time.
And there are some frailties, right? From a legal perspective with respect to doing virtual assessments. And as we've said, there are limits as to what can be assessed virtually or remotely versus what can be assessed in person. And in cases where we have to go to the LAT, the first line of cross-examination that we put to an assessor who does not see the person in person, we put that to them right away. And that's one of the things that we use to tear down the credibility of their findings in their reports and the credibility of their evidence.
Now, because we know that virtual assessments are not the same as in-person assessment, I think it goes back to one of the earlier points that we made relating to documentation of how the person is coping with the particular assessment and whether they're declining in function. One of our participants accurately points out that people who have suffered a brain injury, for instance, may have a tremendous difficulty even coping with the technology, being able to do a Zoom assessment. They may not be able to cope with that. And if that is something that you find with one of your patients, it's important to document that with the insurer so that they understand that you're not able to provide service in the normal way to a person because of their injury. And so I think that's an important point. I think it helps demonstrate from a legal point of view, if a case ever goes to a trial or goes to an arbitration, where people are having difficulty coping with this sort of alternative form of treatment. I think that having the evidence there of how they struggled with it or how they were totally incapable of doing it because of a brain injury, for instance, I think that's valuable evidence that we can use at a trial or an arbitration.
Yeah. Oh, no, definitely. I definitely agree, Len. Being documentation and recording what's happening is going to be key in whether you're doing treatment and it's just an updated report or whether it's some form of an assessment. And, to be honest, this isn't going to just be over, right? In a month or two, we're probably going to be struggling with the whole notion of whether or not virtual assessments are something that can be done. And I know a lot of the rehab companies that we work with have done really good so far in developing platforms and procedures and protocols for doing the assessments. And so I strongly recommend that you keep doing that and make sure to document that again in the assessment report.
Now, I can say that, and I think Stacey, you've sort of commented that your experience is the same. I wouldn't say that there is one consistent approach being taken by insurers at this time. Every insurer is sort of coping with the situation differently. Generally, I've been finding that most insurers have been cooperative, but I can't say that there's one consistent approach that's been adopted across the industry. There's no doubt that when cases go to trial and arbitrations, the courts are going to have to develop a way that they deal with this time period that we're in right now and how assessments and treatment are being done. I don't think any court or any arbitrator is going to hold against a patient or a client or a plaintiff the fact that their treatments were interrupted or reduced or were not done in an in-person way during this crisis. I think that would be tremendously unfair to people who have been injured. They didn't ask for this to happen. This just adds an extra layer of complication to their lives that they don't need on top of their injuries. So I would be very surprised if the courts allow anyone to try to take advantage of this situation when a case goes to trial or to arbitration.
Yeah. And just looking at some of the comments, I know Aaron makes a really good comment that, yeah, virtual assessments are imperfect, but there are a lot of clients who are getting remote healthcare, right? We've got the northern communities, we've got rural communities, we've got all kinds of people who don't have access to the in-person care. And it's good to know that there has already been a criteria. Like hopefully the treatment assessor already has a criteria. They already have a platform in place, procedures in place that they can follow in order to make sure that, they're dotting all their I's, crossing all of their T's, and making sure that things are being documented. Because like I said, this isn't going to be over, right, in a couple of months. We're going to be into this for quite some time, and it's going to take probably a lot of trial and error in order to be able to adapt to the changes.
And one of our listeners this morning pointed out, and I think it's a good point, that all treatment providers should be thinking about equipment that can help people during this time period. I've already seen treatment plans going in from some treatment providers for computer equipment, for different equipment to assist their patients during this time because they either don't have the equipment to be able to conduct a Zoom conference, or they may need some extra training, for instance, to do sort of a training session on how to use Zoom. And so a treatment plan goes in for training people on how to use these platforms and use equipment that otherwise they wouldn't be doing if you were coming to their home and doing an in-person assessment. So I think it's important to think of those things too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. And like Gina has just pointed out, and Milan has pointed out, that it is justified to have the treatment sessions without a doubt. And that's, that's not what we're saying shouldn't be happening, right? It's just that in terms of, from the assessment point of view, if you've known the client, that's different, right? You already understand, you understand them, you know what you're dealing with, you understand their personality, their quirks, all of the nuances that you see and learn about. But if it's a first time assessment where you haven't even really met the client and you're being asked, perhaps, let's say, you've been retained on a file and asked to go in to do a Form 1 assessment of attendant care, and you've never met the client, there's going to be difficulties with respect to getting the full picture in terms of what they need. In situations like that, it may be helpful to have, a family member there, the support, whoever their support person is, have them holding the camera, have them, walking through the home, but making sure that once you get back in touch to seeing the person at their place of residence or wherever you're assessing them, that you do a recap, right? Go back over sort of the preliminary stuff that you did in your initial virtual assessment and go over it again in person and recap it just to make sure that nothing has been missed.
All the comments that we're seeing, and some of the things we've talked about this morning, I think underscores the importance of sort of the dialogue with the insurer during this time period. My experience, at least so far, fortunately, has been that most insurers are willing to work with us. They're willing to work things out. They understand that people are dealing with a very difficult time now on top of their injuries, and they have been working with us to come up with solutions. They haven't been holding time periods against people. They haven't been, sort of strictly enforcing time periods or doing things that, are trying to deliberately hurt our clients. So I think that, dialogue with treatment providers and the adjuster, treatment providers and counsel for your clients is important so that everybody can get on the same page and, we can do our best during these difficult times to provide the best service that we can possibly provide to our clients in need.
And I agree with Len, communication with the adjuster is so important right now. We found from talking to them that, we're all in the same boat, right? We're all working from home. We've all got other things going on. We're all dealing with the stresses of having to make these changes. And it's putting us on a bit more of a, I don't want to say human level to them, but we're being able to develop better relationships with them. And we've been finding that just a quick 5-minute conversation to talk about what's going on and what the challenges our clients are facing, we're getting a lot more traction in terms of cooperation.
And the one thing that I've noticed that I think that, everybody should be mindful of, and I'm sure all the treatment providers, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but the one thing I've noticed is because of these difficult circumstances, the psychological health of our clients is really becoming a significant issue. With the isolation created by the COVID-19 restrictions, people are becoming more isolated, more depressed. They're not seeing their family, they're not seeing their friends, they're not doing the things that they normally enjoy. And this is causing an extra layer of difficulty for a lot of people. So we have to be mindful about that, and it may require additional treatment or treatment that the person wasn't necessarily receiving before that they may need now because of what's going on in our world.
Len, there was a question that I saw from Karen, and what she said was that the insurer is compelling the client to go to a neuropsychological IE on May the 13th, I think the date was, within a couple of weeks. And her concern is that, one, it's just, we're still in the COVID environment. And two, this client who needs quite a bit of support is now being forced to go into this situation, perhaps unsupported. And my initial thought was to, put the concerns in writing to the adjuster, make sure that all of this is documented beforehand, right? You want to set the insurer up to know that there's going to be problems and there's going to be shortcomings.
Yeah, I can say that up till now, if any insurer has requested an in-person assessment, I've contacted the adjuster directly and simply said, no, it's not going to happen. It's not permitted right now. We can't expose our clients to that type of risk. And I haven't had pushback from anybody. They've understood, and we've just documented it and said, no, the client can't attend because of the restrictions that the government has placed on these sort of in-person meetings.
Yeah.
So,
actually, there's a comment from Mark Watson. He's a neuropsychologist, and he's just indicated that the college has ordered all in-person services be shut down at this time. So Karen, that may be something that you can use when talking to the adjuster, or because realistically, if everything's been ordered to be shut down, there's no way this IE should be going ahead.
And some clients may be okay with it. If there's proper social distancing that takes place in their home environment, they may be okay with having the assessment done. That's fine. But if, understandably, a lot of people are going to be very concerned about either going somewhere for an assessment or having someone come into their house that they don't know for an assessment. And I think they're completely in their right to say, no, I'm not agreeing to that at this time. If, any treatment provider out there is having difficulty contacting counsel who may be acting for one of your clients, just pick up the phone and call the adjuster directly.
Yeah.
And you can often work these things out with the adjuster, just by talking to the adjuster. As I said, most people understand what we're going through here, and most people are trying to be cooperative and work things out.
And there's another comment from that I'm just seeing from, I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong, Isle. You're right. There is a concern that insurers may refuse to fund future treatments and say that psychological impairments are due to COVID as opposed to the issues predating COVID. And I think the key to dealing with that is to make sure to emphasize that the issues that they are having, it's because of the fact that they're not able to cope, period, right? Not able to cope because of their brain injury impairments or other injuries and impairments that have led to this. You have to focus on the injuries and the issues that they've had before and how that has made them, less able to deal with what's happened because of COVID, right? You have to just reframe your reporting.
I see Mark has popped up on the screen. That means we must be near the end of our half hour.
We've actually gone a little bit beyond.
Okay.
There is a number of questions in the list, but I don't think we'll be able to get to them all today.
Okay.
Along with the
Well,
chats, this has been.
We have a list of all the questions, so we will respond. We'll respond to all of your questions by email. Wanted to thank everybody for joining us this morning. I think we've learned that maybe half an hour is a little short for these, and we may extend our next sessions a little longer, but thank you very much for participating this morning. Stay safe, stay well. We hope that we're dealing with you in person very soon.
Yep, everybody, I echo Len's comments. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here today. Next session, we're talking about the GOSI and CAD assessments, which is always an informative and hot topic. So we will see you again in a couple of weeks.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.